Without further ado, I'd like to bring on Mark West. Mark has Downhome Productions, and of those of you who are in any way in the entertainment scene here, you know Mark West. He has been not only a large production company for video and sound and lights and heaven knows what else, but I'm sure he's got, because of his profession, some amazing stories, and I'd like you to share some of these, okay? Well, without further ado, Mark West.
My name is Mark West. I started a production company about 34 years ago called Downhome Productions. I've been doing shows in the Ozarks, though, for about 40. Anyway, I'd kind of like to start out a little bit with where I come from. My ancestors, the West, they settled, William West settled in Missouri in Miller County, south of Jeff City, kind of in the northern part of the Ozarks in 1807, just after the Louisiana Purchase. And his son was William West Jr. His son was Warren West, who fought in the Union Cavalry in the Civil War. His son was John Jackson West. His son was Oscar West, who was my grandpa, he was born in 1895. And then my dad was born in a log cabin not far from there in 1919. And him and his older brother, they moved to near Huntingdale, Missouri when they were about 10 years old, or I mean when they were toddlers. And then they moved, when they were 10 years old, they moved not far from where I grew up, which is about 5 miles south of Chilhowie and about 4 miles east of Shawnee Mound. Shawnee Mound's an 8th grade school on Highway 13 between Clinton and Warrensburg. That's where I went to grade school at. I grew up on a farm, about a 100-acre farm west of there. And my dad had been in the World War II anyway. He was a farmer, and there were 7 of us kids. I had 3 older brothers and 2 older sisters, and then I had a little sister. And when I was growing up, there was always music in the house because my older sisters, they had Beach Boy and Elvis Presley albums. My older brothers had The Who and the Rolling Stones and Harry Nilsson. My other brother had the Beatles and Steppenwolf and Black Sabbath. And my oldest brother, he had country music. He had Conway and Loretta and Porter and Charlie Pride. And at the time, in the late 60s, we thought that was kind of uncool because we were really into rock and roll. One of my older brothers played guitar and took guitar lessons. My older sister had a drum kit. My mom played piano and sang in church. But what I really wanted to do was play baseball. And I went to a couple of practices in Chilhowie, and then the league folded. So Mom wasn't going to take me into Clinton to play, so that never happened. A couple of the turning points in my life were Shawnee Mound. After you graduated from the 8th grade there, you either went to Clinton, Leeton, or Chilhowie. Well, my older brothers and sisters had all went to Chilhowie, and I remember having a meeting with Mr. Smith, the principal, and I'm sure he was filling out the paperwork for the state of Missouri because wherever I went to high school got some of Shawnee Mound's money for me living in their school district. And I'm like, well, I guess I got to go to Chilhowie. And he's like, well, no, you don't have to. And I'm like, well, I want to go to Leeton then because they have band. Chilhowie didn't have band. So if I don't make that move, I'm not in band in Leeton, and I don't come to Springfield. You know, I had music teachers in high school, Mark Waters and Dwayne Duchesne. They were pretty influential. It was during that time I taught myself how to play guitar. And the summer of 1978, me and my sisters come down. My cousin was going to school at School of the Ozarks. And for the longest time, I wasn't going to go to college. I was just going to be a farmer. And then I realized how much money cost, and if I bought a farm, I'd probably almost never get it paid for. So I thought, well, I'm gonna try college. So we come down that summer to School of the Ozarks. We visited there. The next day we went to Silver Dollar City. That night we spent the night with the Odell brothers that live over on Fremont Street. We went to Bible camp with them. And Jay, the oldest, he had been going to SMS. He goes, well, SMS has got a pretty good music program. You ought to go there. Well, I got back home, and I'm sure I called down here and got a catalog and some brochures on SMS. Well, that's kind of where I decided to go. I remember the summer of '79. I remember I was trying to get into marching band, and I remember getting off the John Deere tractor raking hay to go. I had to go back to the house to call Bob Scott, who was the band instructor at the time, because I had to call him right at 4 o'clock because that's when he was going to be in the office. And somehow he let me in the band. I really wasn't that good, but anyway, that's kind of my path to SMS. When I came to Springfield in August of '79, 40 years ago here in a few months, I literally didn't know anybody but those Odell brothers from Bible camp. The first year I met Dave Painter, who some of you probably know. Dave lived on the same floor I did in Freddie, and I declared a music major, so we had a lot of the music theory classes together, and we had electronic music together. And I had music theory from Elton Bergstaller. Probably some of you took any music classes probably remember that name. Anyway, my freshman year, I had told him that, as far as a roommate, that I wanted to be with somebody who was interested in music and sports. Well, they put me with a guy named Scott Stanley, and Scott Stanley had been working shows at Hammond Student Center. And so my music, being a music major wasn't going real well. There were a lot of people better than me. I was in the marching band. I played bass drum. We played tonal bass drums. In fact, the guy I played bass drum beside now works for the state liquor control. So my sophomore year, I sought out to work concerts. I joined the campus union board, and because of that, Craig Young was there, and I got on working some shows at Hammond Student Center and McDonald Arena. The first show I ever worked was on the North Mall between Blair Shannon and the bookstore, and it was a band called Burgundy Rose, and I got to run follow spot for that. Well, later that year, I got to work my first show at Hammond Student Center, which was the Beach Boys. And all three of the Wilson brothers were on that show. Carl, Dennis, Brian. It was an all-white stage, white monitors, white piano. It was a great experience. I got yelled at a couple of times because it was my first show and I really didn't know the terminology yet. And through the campus union board, I met a guy named Dave McKay, and working Hammond Student Center, I met a guy named Dick Magruder. Later, I would become not a full-time AV guy, but a part-time, full-time AV guy. And I worked with this gentleman over here, Pat Johnson. We had a blast. And through those two areas, that's kind of where I met a lot of other people. Dave McKay entrusted me with doing shows in McDonald Arena. And there's a poster over there from those years, the Emmylou Harris show and the Juice Newton show. Dick Magruder, I not only worked for, but I had electricity and electronics classes with him, because my second year I declared undecided, and then my third year in college I declared a major in electricity and electronics, because I started thinking, well, this work and show thing, I could do that. I'd driven a B John Deere tractor. I could drive a forklift, So I'd had so many music credits that I wound up getting a minor in music. So, you know, I had the music theory, the 1-4-5 chord, you know, all that kind of stuff. But then I wound up getting a degree with electricity and electronics and working just tons of shows between the Campus Union Board and McDonald Arena, and working with Dick Magruder and Pat Johnson at Hammond Student Center. You know, we would do Alabama every year, Hank Jr. every year, Willie Nelson every year. We'd do the Cars, we did Tom Petty, we did, I mean, just on and on. Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, it was about the time she had that song, I Love Rock and Roll. Well, that show was originally supposed to be in McDonald Arena, and it got moved to Hammond Student Center because it was selling so well. McDonald Arena held about 2,500 people. They moved it to Hammond Student Center, and I think it sold about 4,500. And anyway, just through those contacts in college, I wound up meeting John Gott, who had Dynamite Sound and Lighting at the time. Dave McKay got me on the NACA stage crew, which stood for National Association of Campus Activities. And I worked with Jerry Millington and Ron Mathis on that first stage crew, which was in Overland Park, Kansas. I learned how to wire a stage from Jerry Millington. And then later from the Dynamite contact, I met Larry Hampton and Larry Tucker. And I later would do a lot of shows with them and be on tour with them. I also met Frank Stewart, who owned Associated Theatrical Contractors. I met guys like Robin Tate and John Schmeemeyer with Contemporary. Contemporary was probably one of the top 5 promoters in the country at the time. I met guys like Kevin Cassidy. Kevin did, for the last, I don't know how many years, did all the Tom Petty tours. He was out with Def Leppard last year. He was out with Fleetwood Mac. And then also in 1983 at the MDA Super Dance, I met a couple of guys, Kerry and Tracy Cole, the brothers that make up the Lefty Brothers. And they've been friends ever since then. I've known those guys for 30-some years. Also in 1983, we did a Kansas City band named Shooting Star in McDonald Arena. And there was a guy at the time that a lot of you people out here probably know that I met on working that show, and that was Dan Faggard. Dan Faggard was working for Shooting Star at the time, and that would come into play later when Dan took over and renovated Swissville Amphitheater. He hired me as his production manager. But through these contacts, through Chancey Van Pelt, who was brought here from Las Cruces, New Mexico to open Hammond Student Center in 1976, I got wind of the Swissville Amphitheater that was going to open down in Lampe. And so I got a phone number and a contact. Well, the contact's name was Hal Meadows. Hal Meadows had worked at Shepherd of the Hills, I believe. And anyway, the first year, Russ Malden was the production manager. Russ does sound at Silver Dollar City. And he was Hal's production manager at the time. And he had told me that, well, you know, we already got all the positions filled. This is 1983. They let me come down to the very first show, which was Jerry Reed. And I wound up filling in about half the concerts for Joey Taylor. And I just ran Fall Spot the first year. The second year, they let me be on the stage crew and run a Fall Spot. And Sawyer Brown, who had won Star Search maybe on CBS, they played there a couple of times, and Hal and Russ become friends with Mark Miller and those guys. Well, by the end of the year, in September of '84, Russ went on the road with them. So that's when I took over as the production manager. I think it was like an Oak Ridge Boys show they opened for. But anyway, so we finished out the year of '84, and then in the spring of '84, we did the Beach Boys down there for the first time, and the Lefty Brothers opened for them. I just remember they did an afternoon show, and I just remember sitting in the back hallway on the road cases. You know, we were drinking lots of Floods because we were all sweating our butts off. and the Lefty Brothers cut into the Beatles medley, and I'm just like going, oh my God, who are these guys? They're awesome. Anyway, so I still know those guys. I mean, they're like my other brothers. But the next spring, because of doing shows like the Beach Boys, they had to renovate the stage again. They added on to the front of the stage just because those shows were bigger than what the place was built for. Well, I went to lunch with Hal Meadows one afternoon, and Hal said, because I wasn't looking to start a company, I was looking to go to work for Bandit Lights or Video Technica Lights out of Union, Missouri. Those guys in the 70s had done like Hart and Kansas and Charlie Daniels and the Oak Ridge Boys and Ricky Skaggs. I mean, they had a big clientele list. And so Hal goes, well, why don't you buy some lights and rent them to me? And I'm like, well, you know, okay. I got with Frank Stewart, and Frank rented me some dimmers, and I drove to Knoxville, Tennessee in a budget rental truck and met with Mike Strickland, the guy who started Bandit Lights, and I bought 4 sticks of P&B truss with 56 Altman power cans in them, and a Leprechaun 1000 lighting console, and I brought it back, and that's what we did lights with at Swissville Amphitheater for the next couple, 3 years. And I've got a picture somewhere of a setup when George Strait was playing and our truss was in the air. Anyway, so that right there is how Downhome Productions started. Well, I seem to kind of be in the right place at the right time. Because I didn't have a full list of clientele yet, I just started the company. But, you know, I didn't need to make a ton of money either, because I lived over on Normal Street and had a roommate. My rent was like $100 a month plus utilities. I didn't have a car payment yet, so I could like almost literally work 1 show a month and make all my payments. And so because of that, another company I wanted to work for was Dynamite. I wanted to work for John Gott, but he was putting more of his emphasis into building the moto lights and not so much into building a light rig. So that didn't happen. But what did happen was in the fall of '85, I went out and did a bunch of Roy Clark shows with Larry Tucker and John Pitts. I'm not sure Larry Hampton was on some of those. But anyway, the next spring, I did some of those Roy Clark shows, and a guy named Sid Pierce had started working for Dynamite. And Sid and I went to Sarasota, Florida, and I was on the first Roy Clark show that Sid ever did with Roy in the Purple Theater in Sarasota, Florida. And Sid went on, at the time he wasn't Roy's sound engineer, but he went on to become that after John Pitts left. And Sid was with Roy for, I don't know, 22, 23, 20-some years. And anyway, that same spring, in the off season, we'd stored my lights in the warehouse at ATC, and Mick Warnock from Kansas City had seen my lights sitting in the ATC warehouse, and he told Frank, he goes, well, I'm gonna rent those. I got a Walmart meeting coming up, and Frank said, well, he wants to rent your lights, and then as we bantered back and forth, he's like, well, I want you to come with him, So that was the first Walmart meeting I was on, and it was in the Little Rock Convention Center. We stayed in the Excelsior Hotel, and Walmart was only the #3 retailer at the time, and Sam Walton spoke, David Glass, Al Johnson, Don Soderquist, Jack Shoemaker, who was from Buffalo, Missouri, who was the president of Walmart at the time. Just on and on and on. And so that was the beginning of 16 years of doing Walmart meetings, and our company really kind of grew with them. And also, a few years into that, Mick and I did the first Sam's meeting away from Walmart down in Dallas, Texas. It was a pretty good gig because we'd go in the morning real early and do a couple 3-hour meeting, and then the rest of the day we'd drive around Dallas and try to find the best Mexican food we could and drink Corona beer. And so that was the beginning of Walmart. Then later that fall, Dick Magruder, who I'd worked with Pat Johnson and at Hammond Student Center, he shows up at my house over on Normal Street, and him and little Jimmy Rickard are drinking some Busch beer, and he goes, I'd heard that Ronald Reagan was coming to town, and I just thought they were going to use the PA at Hammond Student Center. Well, Dick goes, we gave him your card, Mark, and we told him that you were the only game in town. So that was the first presidential appearance I ever did. It was Ronald Reagan at Hammond Student Center in October 1986. Then, you know, we kept doing the Walmart meetings in '87, Reagan appearance. Also in October 1985, I was the production manager at Swissville Amphitheater. I was doing some isolated stuff for Dynamite Sound. John and Larry Tucker and John Pitts, we went to Naperville, Illinois to do a Roy Clark show, and we loaded out, and I was doing a show at McDonald Arena the next day, so I spent the night in a hotel by Chicago O'Hare, and TWA was still an airline then. I got up and flew into St. Louis, got my connecting flight. In the same day we were doing Stevie Ray Vaughan in McDonald Arena, my roommate was covering the Johnny Cash gig at Swiss Villa, and I actually was on the plane with Johnny Cash's road crew on the way into Springfield. I go, hey man, my roommate's you're gonna be working with my roommate today. So that was kind of a fun experience. In I believe it was the spring of 1988. At that point, I had probably a little one-liner in the white pages in the phone book. Well, I got a call from a guy named Rich Conover, and Rich Conover was in the marketing department at Bass Pro Shops, and he's like, well, hey Mark, we're going to do this fishing fair, and we need some PAs. Well, the thing just kept changing. I mean, the next thing we know, we're doing about 5 or 6 little PAs, Jimmy Houston and Bill Dance and all these fishing seminars, and we're doing some lighting and rope lighting and stuff for the Miss Sport Fishing USA, and that was when there were so many people in Bass Pro that the fire marshal shut them down and made them start counting the people that came in. And the other thing is, Rich Conover, he didn't tell us who was coming, but one day, maybe a Saturday, he goes, hey, I need a mic. I'm going to need a mic over here about 2 o'clock or whatever. Well, it was George Herbert Walker Bush that was coming. At the time, he was the vice president. So the Bass Pro fishing fairs, Swiss Villa went on to about 87 or somewhere in there. I remember doing the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band there, and it was the year after John McCune had left, because if you read his book, he'd gotten a divorce and he'd left the band, and Bernie Layden, the original Eagle, was playing with him. He was playing banjo and guitar and some stuff like that. That was pretty fun. And then a competing amphitheater opened up in Branson called the Ozark Mountain Amphitheater. And that's kind of where I got to know Randall Chowning, and Larry Hampton worked there. And later on, Dave McKay was booking some of the shows there from the Campesini board. And we did the Beach Boys there again in '87. So I think we did them 84, 85, 86 at Swiss Villa, 87 at Ozark Mountain Amphitheater. And then in 1991, when they played out at James River Sports Complex, it was the Beach Boys, the Everly Brothers, and the Lefty Brothers. So, I mean, it seemed like every time the Beach Boys come close to town, the Lefty Brothers were getting open for them. I mean, they loved it. They were a great band back then. They still are. They're Tony Orlando's band right now. I bought my first road cases from Randall Channing when he lived out on Highway 14. About in that time, in the mid to late 80s, I started working shows here at University Plaza before they built the convention center next door. It used to just be the hotel and the ballroom here. And We got on the tracker dealers meetings through Diane Thompson and the ladies in the sales department here. You know, it was about the 90s. That's when Dan Faggard hired me to be the production manager down at Swissville Amphitheater. And he was working for Contemporary, Chris Fritz and New West and Contemporary out of out of Kansas City and St. Louis. And they went down to Swiss Villa and they renovated again. They took out all the autographs on the back wall, made the stage deeper, built a loading dock on the back, made the wings where we could put semis on them so we could get 3 or 4 semis backed up to the stage at once. And they bolted rigging steel between the main beams. And the first show we did after it was renovated was Hart. And I just remember the Hart production manager had been out with Don Henley, and they call those outdoor amphitheaters like that, they call them sheds. Well, this guy looks at me and he goes, "This isn't a shed, this is a shithole." You know, because it kind of really was a small little theater. It was down in the Ozarks and it's beautiful, but you know, you start putting a big show in there, it could be challenging. And probably one of my favorite shows working at Swissville Amphitheater during that time was the Steve Miller Band. And Jamie over here works for that guy right now. It was the first time I ever saw anybody use inner-ear monitors. And they had 3 semis, and I just remember thinking, you know, this is the best production value I've seen in 3 semis in a long time, because it was a great show. You know, it was Clare Brothers, it was, oh, I don't know, I can't remember who was doing lighting, but it was a great show. You know, we did a lot of shows down there during that time. Cinderella was the one I remember being the loudest. I mean, they were painfully loud. Every show is loud, but they were painfully loud. You know, then in the early 90s, we did a bunch of Amway shows. And to be honest with you, I hated those things. But, I mean, at one time we were doing 20 of them a year, and we made some pretty good money off of them. Then in about 93, the Branson boom started happening in the Grand Palace, and Jamie Carter over here did monitors at the Grand Palace, him and Michael Spence. And I had known Hampton from working with him at Dynamite. Also, I failed to mention, in the late 80s, I was on the road for 4 years. I did about 60 or 80 shows a year with a Christian band named Petra. And the lead singer of Petra at that time was a guy named John Schlitt, who was the original lead singer of Head East. You know, if you've ever heard that song, Never Been Any Reason, from 1975, well, that's John. John's the second singer. There's 2 lead singers in that song. But anyway, the Branson boom, the Grand Palace, we seemed like we were down there working on the Branson Jam. We were down there working on the TV specials, the Family Channel, the Kenny Rogers CBS Christmas special. And then you know, that kept going along. In the mid-90s, I had a friend named Chuck Farthing who had helped do the crew at Swiss Villa, and Chuck was out doing lighting for Aaron Tippin, and we got one of our light rigs out with Aaron for the fall tour. And then after we did the fall tour in '95, in 1996, Chuck, who lived in Nashville at that time, helped open my Nashville office, which I had for 6 years. Kind of hopping back to Walmart a little bit. Walmart, I got to work with a lot of really skilled people. I learned a lot. The first Walmart gig, Bill Gilbert was the lighting director, and Bill Gilbert had been the gaffer on movies like Twister and another one. I don't remember what it was, but and Bill, through knowing Bill, we got a bunch of stuff on a movie in Kansas City called Article 99 that had Kiefer Sutherland and Ray Liotta. And anyway, that was a pretty good movie. Then after we were working with Bill Gilbert, they put a guy named Bill Greenfield on as the Walmart lighting director. Well, Bill Greenfield, oh, he was in Local 1. Bill Greenfield lit the Ed Sullivan Show in the 50s and 60s. And so he had lit the Beatles, he'd lit Elvis Presley. And then when he told me he lit the Captain Kangaroo Show, I was like, oh, Bill. We used to watch the Captain Kangaroo Show every morning before we get on the school bus going to Shawnee Mound. You're my hero now. And then he had lit the 1976 Republican Convention in Kansas City that Tony Orlando performed on. But he knew a lot of people, and because of that, he got us on the Welk PBS shoots because he was the lighting director in those. He got us on a PBS shoot that was an opera at the Indiana School of Music. He got us on the PBS shoot at the Powell Symphony Hall in St. Louis because they were hiring a new conductor and they were putting it on PBS. I think they put it on live and then they replayed it too. But it was just a treat working for him. He was a demanding old cuss, though, man. He knew what the latest technology was, the latest and greatest, and he wanted it on his show. He would do stuff to us like on the moving lights before the Walmart meetings. He'd make us change all the lamps because after a light bulb has been in a fixture long enough, it starts turning brown. Well, when you put new light bulbs in them, they're all white, and that's what he wanted. He wanted the absolute best he could get. So that was a big learning experience working with him. Other shows we did through those times were the MDA telethons, the Children's Miracle Network telethons, Firefall. The thing I remember about Firefall after Carrie and Tracy Cold started touring with Tony Orlando, I'd be doing Firefall and my cell phone would ring and it'd be Carrie Cole. And he'd go, "Hey, Mark West, how you doing?" He goes, "Tell everybody I said hi. I just wanted to call and say hi to everybody." You know, he was just always so thoughtful in that way. When we had our Nashville office, somehow, maybe out of the Yellow Pages, Kelly Wilson got our phone number, and we started doing the Gibson Summer Jam behind the Gibson Custom Shop, which used to be on Massman Drive, not far off of Briley Parkway and Elm Mill Pike. But Kelly used us every year, and we did acts like Peter Frampton and Dickie Betts. You know, there's only 1,000 people because they do it in conjunction with the NAMM show in the Nashville Convention Center. I just remember Ernie King, the guy who ran the pro shop, the first year we did it, he's like, "Yeah, we're just going to try to get a bunch of people over here and get them liquored up, try to sell some guitars." But I mean, it's great. I mean, that's where they made the Les Pauls. You know, they had a sign in the warehouse that says, "Where the greatest guitars in the world are made." And the year we were doing Peter Frampton, Frampton's guy wanted inner ears, and he really wanted Clare Brothers to do the event. And Gibson kept saying, "Well, we ain't got any more money." And then they go, I'm like, "Well, they got to have inner ears." He says they got to have inner ears because the guy, I forget who the guy was with Frampton at the time, but he goes, "Man, if I don't get these Frampton, I'll have my gizzard." His exact words. And so Gibson's like, will you take a guitar? So they traded me a 1957 Gibson Gold Top Remake, which is what, worth $3,000 something. And Randall wound up playing it on our Songs of the Game album. Some of the venues around Springfield, I mean, we helped open, well, when Juanita K. Hammond's Hall for the Performing Arts opened, when they put the first wall up, I went over there that day with Charles Bontrager and Enoch Morris when they lifted the first wall in the air. So I don't know that I really helped open the place, but I was around and I helped give Ed ideas of where he could get stuff and things. And then the Gilloys, we we put the lighting rig in there, we put the fly rail, so we kind of helped that open that place too. And we did production in there for the first couple of years or so. I remember doing sound in there for Eric Church, and now Eric Church is in arenas. Then we helped open the JQH Arena when we put the Eagles in there. The Eagles were the first show, and it got bigger. You know, Hammond Student Center used to be 3 semis, 3 semis, 3 semis, 4 semis. When we did KISS, it was 7 semis. I think that was the biggest we ever saw. But JQH Arena here, we're doing the Eagles, 12 semis. And we went from 4 or 6 riggers in the air to 16 riggers in the air, 8 ground riggers, 80-some stage hands, 8 loaders, like 4 or 5 runners. It was just, you know, they brought in their own stage. You know, when they do those kinds of shows, what they do is they're flying the rigging points and the sound and lighting points on one end of the arena. And on this end of the arena, they're building the stage, they're putting the back line, the drum kits, all that stuff on it. When the sound and lights fly in the air, they get about 50 stage hands around the stage because it's sitting on wheels, and they push it underneath the sound and lighting. Bam, you do the show. At the end of the night, they do the reverse. And they go out the doors like this. It's like you're loading 2, 3 trucks at once. It just so we opened that, and then I was involved in opening the O'Reilly Family Events Center. I got to have some influence on it. They kind of brought me in after the foundation had been poured, and the building had already been ordered, the metal for the building, so I didn't really get to influence the rigging or the loading dock so much, but I got them tons of power. I got them 2 400 amp services with cam-lock plugging panels. I got them 2 200 amp services. I got them a follow spot platform over the alumni area, and all the comm lines are in conduit in the building. So we had influence on that. Then when I had the Nashville office, before 5 minutes, before I went down there, I saw Randall and Janie. Randall Chowning was playing at Cartoons, and they had told me they were getting ready to move to Nashville and work with Janie's little brother Scott. And so whenever I go to Nashville, they go, "Oh, come over for dinner tonight." And so I kind of got to know them a little better down there. And I talked Randall into helping me write a song called Long Ball, and we recorded that down there. And then 6, 8 years after that, let's see, he moved back in 05, 06. Well, in 2009, he come out to my house to watch the Tennessee Titans game, and I talked him into helping me with Songs of the Game. And the first Songs of the Game CD over here, Randall produced and co-wrote all the songs on it, all the ones that are original, and Alan Ross, and I knew I wasn't a very good singer, so I had Carrie and Tracy Cole sing on it. And one night we're down at Nick Sibley's studio, and Carrie turns around to me and says, "Well, Mark, you should have Tony sing on one of these." And I'm like, "Really?" And Tony Orlando? And they're like, "Oh yeah, he'll come up here and do it. He's a big baseball fan." Well, we kind of just stayed on him until he agreed to come up and do it. And so he's on the CDs over here, and along with a lot of other good Springfield musicians. Lloyd Hicks sings a song on both of them and plays drums on several of the songs. But anyway, what I would like to do today is the green CD I'll sell for $10, the other CD for $15. If you buy both of them, they're $20, and you can give the money to Music Mondays of the Ozarks. I don't know, give it to Robin or whoever's collecting the money. So if you want to buy, am I done? I'm collecting the money. Oh, okay. Chris Albert's collecting the money, the multitasker. So anyway, is that my time? Any questions?
You talked about an interview a few
Talk about the inner ear microphones. Jamie Carter knows about them.
I know. I was wondering about you mentioned inner ear microphones a few times. Could you explain a little bit about that to us that are not learned in this field too much?
Well, they're inner ear monitors, and what the advantage of them is you know, you're not going to have feedback through the monitor wedge in front of them. Also, it keeps the stage volume down, and when you keep the stage volume down, you don't have all the bleed through the vocal mics and all the other mics on stage. You know, they're just hearing it in their ears. But you know, a lot of the guys from the 70s, you know, some of them still don't want them. Like Elton John or Paul McCartney, you still see like 3 or 4 Clare Brother wedges around those guys. They got to be deaf, because that could create a lot of sound pressure level.
Is that what my problem is?
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fine.
They didn't have those at the new Biggio Theater, did they? Yeah, you can order them and get them formed to your ear. Like they put something in your ear and take the print of your ear, and then they make it to fit your ear.
What was your favorite show?
I don't know that I got a favorite. I got ones like that Steve Miller Band show, and the Cars, and events like that are kind of my favorite. But
well, the most fun show, okay.
Oh, we used to have a lot of fun at Hammond Student Center. In 1984, we did the first day to the REO Speedwagon Wheels Are Turning Now tour. And we'll probably get in trouble now, but maybe the statute of limitations have gone into effect. So they were in Hammond Student Center like 3 or 4 days before they actually did the show, because they were, you know, checking everything out. It's the first day of the tour, and you know, we had to build plywood pads for the speaker, the floor stack speaker, so the pyro wouldn't burn them. That was worth 2 cases of Budweiser. Then we built them some stairs. That's 4 cases of Budweiser. Then we did something else for them. We got 2 more cases of Budweiser. So we horse traded like 8 cases of Budweiser out of that show.
Did you ever do the Shrine?
Yes. Yeah, we did the Don Ships and Bill Brown benefit show there in October of 2004. Let's see, they got killed in July of 2004, and we did that show in 2000 and just that next fall.
Where was the car show at?
The car show was in Hammond Student Center. That was a bizarre show. It was 4 semis, and they lit it with like green and neutral density and white. It was just the weirdest looking thing, but it sold out like that. Yes.
Especially you.
Hey, don't forget I'm a radio personality. I can talk loud. Let's stick it in your ear.
That's a music store.
That's. I wonder if you'd have the audience raise their hand if they've been to the new Bijou Theater on Traffic Way often enough. I figured about
that was before my time.
It wasn't before Kurt Hargis' time, that's for sure. It's very dearly beloved by many of the Springfield music fans.
Yeah, I just remember something that Steve Canada used to say when they'd ask him what the hardest working job you could have. He'd go, "Well, it's got to be milking cows." And then his incident when him and Rule Chapel got left at the Canada told Rule's all worried, and Canada told him, "Well, the first thing we're going to do is eat breakfast."
That is exactly right.
So,
one question. Can you share with us, not a disaster particularly, although be my guest, but anything that was really hilarious during all your productions and or something that stayed with you as being an incident? You probably have repressed those in your mind.
Yeah. I don't know. We just had a lot of fun times working for Dick Magruder. Dick Magruder would always come up with a
That was my fault.
He would
That's
always
what happens
come
when you turn it off.
He would always come up with an alternative name for the acts, like Joan Jett and the Blackhearts was Joan Zitt and the Blackheads, or something like that. Something to make it fun. I mean, he was just the greatest. Everybody loved working for him because we always had fun working for him. As far as incidents, I don't know. I remember in 1988 we did Pia Zadora for the Cox Medical Benefit Ball in the ballroom up here, where we have the Music Mondays when it's over there. Well, that ceiling's only 14 feet high. Well, they put about a 2-foot stage in there, and then they put the horns up on risers. So you get these guys sitting up here playing trumpets, and the ceiling's like right here. And we got park hands like right behind their head. And Tennyson Flowers, who later wound up in Branson working for Andy Williams, he was the lighting director that night, and he was beside himself. He just couldn't believe it. What kind of place am I in? I got park hands in the back of my musicians' heads. There just wasn't any trim height.
Mark?
Mark, you've had a lot of outdoor concerts, and working for us at MSU for the Ozark Celebration Festival, you've come across some weather challenges.
Yeah, we had to weather that one year with you guys on Rhonda Vincent, but I worked a show in Wentzville, Missouri at the county fair that was worse than that. There was a tornado in the area, and we had a stage top, and we had 8 guy wires on it, and that day made me a believer in guy wires, because we had lowered the top end to where it was just above the drum kit, and I mean, it was just shaking the hell out of that roof, and it didn't go anywhere, but I mean, it blew horizontal rain across the stage. And Danny Mayo, who had worked for the Daredevils in the 70s, he was the Martinez road manager, and we're in the office with a bunch of farmers up there, and they couldn't understand why we couldn't still do the show. And Danny's like, well, I don't think you really want the liability at this point, because there's water and everything, and you put power back through that. Water is a conductor. That's one thing I learned over there at Kemper Hall in electronics. And it's okay after you dry it out, but don't turn it on wet. So, and after the incident in Indiana where the 7 people were killed at the fair, at the Sugarland concert, Jim Tucker, who had been my attorney at the time, he was the president of the IAFE. Well, that next Monday morning he called me and was asking me about that, and I told him that I thought they should have got the people away from it, because when you hear there's 70-mile-an-hour winds coming, there ain't nothing you can do. You just got to kind of get away from this stuff.
Any more questions?
You got to mention lighting the pole.
Oh, yeah, in 1999 in January, because of my friend Bobby Brantley and Jim McClellan with Contemporary, Contemporary was hired to produce the Pope John Paul II's appearance in the Americas. And there were several locations. There was the airport location in the hangar, I think Bill Clinton spoke at. We did the youth rally in the arena, which has changed names 3 or 4 times since then. Back then it was the Kiel Center, now it's maybe the Enterprise Center. We did the Enterprise Center, and then Clare Brothers and a couple other companies did the TWA Dome, but it was like a presidential appearance. You had to leave, the Secret Service did a bomb sweep with their dogs, and then you had to come back in through metal detectors, exactly like a presidential appearance. And when I took most of those pictures, probably all but 2 of them. They had an aisle through the middle of the arena, and they brought him out on that golf cart. It was like a 2-bench golf cart, and it had a roll bar on it, and he stood up and held on to that. He was like 80-some years old then. And when he come out into that arena, man, it was like Elvis Presley had walked on stage. It was just 20,000 kids just screaming at the top of their lungs. And during the day before that, they were all chanting, JP2, we love you, JP2. It was definitely a memorable event.
Mark, can't thank you enough. Terrific. You did a great job. Thanks. Thank you. We'll get this later.
Don't forget the CDs.
Please don't forget the CDs, and I want to thank Mark personally for having all the money that you pay for these CDs donated to Music Monday. It's a fantastic gift for us. Thank you.